Red Fay 48, Episode 5, The Giordano Jazz Dance Company. Hello, social media mites and mavens. James Homan here. This audiocast will tell of my good fortune in being accepted as an apprentice to the Gus Giordano International Jazz Dance Company in Evanston, Illinois. I'd graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Madison with a BA in English literature. I'd hitchhiked from Madison to the left coast, returned to Madison, and then boarded a bus to Miami Beach, Florida. Completely lost, with no direction or concept of any future. I wanted to dance, and Carl Rogers had encouraged me to follow my bliss. Becoming my own person was getting interesting. After cutting my long hair to look like a basic training reject, I moved into a third-floor corner room in Evanston, Illinois' YMCA. I found a part-time job selling underwear at the local Marshall Field's department store and began an intensive study of jazz dance, tap, and ballet. Other than the 2 sets of work clothes required by Marshall Field's, I lived primarily in tights and leotards, schlepping the ubiquitous dance bag everywhere. My room was snuggled up into the trees lining the streets outside. Kitty Corner was a building that had an enormous clock, which also told me the time and temperature. I could walk to work, to the studio, and the transit station, so I didn't need a car. I had found my, quote, room somewhere, unquote, that Eliza Doolittle sings about in the opening of My Fair Lady prior to her big adventure. My big adventure was just beginning. Should you be interested in contacting me, please click on the website image, jlhoman.com, and thank you for your time and consideration. While studying with Gus's troupe of very talented dancers, I had my eureka experience, the first aha moment of my life. It took me 23 years. I've always been a little remedial. I'd found something to do with my life, a future. Making designs in space with my body was exhilarating. I was becoming a dancer. My body changed dramatically. In only a few weeks, I started to resemble an anorexic 14-year-old female with a mustache. Surprisingly, I found dance to be as mental as it ever was physical. Dance proved to be my gift, my talent. Dance now became my art. The more I studied jazz, tap, and modern dance, the more I was being told that ballet actually was my forte. In fact, although I wasn't informed until a year later, Gus had been talking with Robert Joffrey about auditioning me during one of the Joffrey Ballet's summer residences at the Ravinia Festival in Highland Park, Illinois. Imagine this poor kid from the industrial mentality of southeastern Wisconsin, now saddled with thousands of dollars in student loans and a seemingly useless BA degree in English literature, being encouraged to believe that dance is my art. Although I was financially scraping by and making $5 a month good faith payments on my school loans, I was learning a performing art form that brought me more happiness than anything I'd ever experienced in my first 23 years of life. And I was being encouraged to follow my dreams to New York City. However, the actual move to New York took me 3 years to accomplish. I realized that to find sustaining work as a professional dancer in New York, I would need to become a member of at least one of 5 performing unions. Fortuitously, other members of the Giordano Dance Company explained that the St. Louis Municipal Opera, or the Muni, would be auditioning for their professional summer stock season in April. It was how the company dancers made money for the 3 months they didn't tour. I was invited to join them. Auditions for the Muni's 1975 summer stock season took place over the Easter weekend. 6 of us Giordano dancers drove down from Evanston to St. Louis in one car. Mary Beth and Eric had gotten their equity cards the previous season and were helping the 4 neophytes, Margaret, Jeff, David, and myself, get through the 3-day ordeal. We arrived on the morning of Good Friday and began auditioning at 1 p.m. in the large ballroom of the hotel on Kings Highway that bordered Forest Park. The men were separated from the women to audition in their respective group, and I was given the number 371 for men dancers. They were only hiring 8. All dancers were given 3 different jazz, tap, and ballet combinations on each of the 3 days. By Sunday, there were only 16 hopefuls in each of the 4 categories. The final day of auditions, the singers were given dance routines, and the dancers had to sing for Maestro Don Chan, the Muni's musical director. The next day, 64 anxious talents were gathered in the enormous grand ballroom. In the middle of the grand ballroom sat a grand piano. Hopefuls were seated in one line of chairs against the ballroom's 4 floors. For many who had worked previous seasons, this may have been less stressful, but we newbies were raging with endorphin highs and final audition anxieties. The dancers sang first. Each was expected to present one audition song, after which Dr. Chan would test the potential chorus members' musicality. This final test in the 3-day process absolutely terrified most singers, not to mention the dancers. When my name was called, I sang Going Home with Bonnie Jean from Lerner and Lowe's Brigadoon to the best of my ability, despite my chattering teeth. After Maestro Chan played a note on the keyboard and asked me to sing an augmented fourth from that note. Yikes, what's an augmented fourth? What did augment even mean? God only knows from what depths of anxiety I pulled this knowledge, but I thought I had once heard that the first interval of notes from the song Maria from West Side Story might be an augmented fourth. I sang Maria, and the singers in the room applauded. It was a little better than that, actually. I was certain that no one was particularly listening to my modest attempt to get this job and was shocked to hear their response. Later in rehearsals, 2 singers hired for the season came up to tell me that they would never forget that musical trick. Later that Easter Sunday's auspicious afternoon, 16 men were arranged by height. I was the 3rd shortest. We were marched back into the grand ballroom for final selection. Eric, who was 2nd shortest, stood to my left, and David, also from the Giordano group and the shortest, stood at the end. When my name was called, I obediently stepped forward. Discussion at the front table took place for what seemed an eternity. Then Eric's name was called to step forward. He did so, and I was then asked to step back. I realized that Eric, having worked at the Muni the previous summer, should of course be chosen. And then, as if we had been doing a production of a chorus line, the front line was dismissed. The 8 female dancers who had been previously selected were brought in to meet us. We would be their new dance partners for the summer. Carol Bosch stood to my right and Millie Garvey stood to my left. Both grabbed my hands and told me to stop shaking. I had successfully obtained a job. By signing the professional contract, I received my own actor's equity card and felt my future in dance was validated with a union membership. The drive home to Evanston was not as fun-filled as it had been on the way down to St. Louis. Mary Beth, David, and I were the only ones hired to do the 5 musicals the season that summer. Eric, Margaret, and Jeff were alternates and would be hired if someone left the company. Returning to Evanston, I had to give notice that I would be leaving my day job selling men's underwear, sublet my apartment for the summer, busily pack my life into one suitcase, plus the ubiquitous dance bag, and try to contain my excitement. I had no idea of the grueling schedule that summer stock would demand. Those of us who had been hired by the Muni became the chorus that backed up the stars and supporting principal casts in each of the 6 touring classics. Ed Ames would star in Carousel, Carol Lawrence in Funny Girl, Dolores Gray and Anne Reinking in Girl Crazy, the Hudson brothers and Margaret Hamilton in The Wizard of Oz, David Burney in Camelot, and Richard Fredericks and Anne Blythe in Kiss Me Kate. All 6 shows toured to 2 other Midwest outdoor theaters that summer for one-week engagements. In Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Kansas City, there were no matinees because the theaters were outdoors, making lighting impossible except at night. The Muni seated 15,000 people each night. 8-hour rehearsals were held 6 days a week outdoors on large, covered, open-air spaces in 90-degree heat. I'm not kidding. The Muni's performance stage had been erected over a waterway that ran through Forest Park. This immense space seemed the size of 2 football fields and actually had 5 trees growing on it. They served as a natural kind of backdrop. There was no curtain. Instead, 2 large, 3-foot-thick walls were motorized to open and close from the sides of the proscenium, where the control buttons were located. Chorus members were advised not to get caught between them because there was no way of stopping these massive machinations in mid-action. They would crush anyone who might find themselves in that dire situation. My first night in the opening performance of Carousel on that stage was unforgettable. The audience appeared to be a wall of people, as if I were on a basketball court, and I couldn't actually see the top rows of the amphitheater. Imagine singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" in the final scene of that show and not crying. It's not possible. Following the close of each show on Sunday night, the sets were dismantled and sets for the next show were erected. We had Mondays to ourselves until midnight, when we had a technical run-through of the next show and met the new principals. On Tuesday at 10 a.m., we began rehearsals for the following musical. The new show opened that Tuesday night. For the first 3 weeks of rehearsal, the entire chorus of 32 singers and dancers memorized the entire musical scores of each of the 6 shows. The Wizard of Oz was also scheduled for a week of performance at the Starlight Theater in Kansas City, which didn't have air-conditioned dress rooms. Following our final performance of The Wizard of Oz at the Starlight Theater, our Munchkin mayor, Bobby Gorman, gathered a group of chorus boys to celebrate the end of our summer run. Bobby had played Kansas City before and knew of a gay bar that he thought we would all enjoy. There, Bobby introduced me to a New York actor he knew who became my first heartthrob, Christopher. Chris had finished his run in the Sunshine Boys at another professional theater in Kansas City and told me to look him up if I ever got to the city. Although we didn't have sex that night, we did dance a slow dance, and I really liked the fit. Anyway, dancing seemed to me to be the best way of getting to know anyone. My professional career began, and my direction was confirmed. I would save as much money as possible and moved to New York City that September. By the end of the summer, 5 other chorus members from that summer stock season decided they were also relocating to the Big Apple. I had saved $650 and would now be accompanied by 5 new friends who would save me from losing my way in my new prairie. I was feeling that my life was fearlessly fated and was on its way to getting lost in New York City. Outro. And that and that concludes this podcast. Please check in next week for episode 6 as another 100 people get off the train and I find myself herding 5 cats in their first New York City experience. There's one significant win, and then there are more insignificant non-wins. Not unlike most actors / singers / dancers / models / etc. who come to New York with dreams of recognition, I began to recognize a talent I hadn't known I possessed. Professional waiter. Then I have a knee injury, which keeps me out of the running for about a year and a half, ending with my biggest win, my first Broadway show. Thank you for your time and interest. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance while embracing similarities and respecting differences.